Wednesday is World Hijab Day, and organizers hope this will foster better understanding for women who choose to wear the garment. Today on DW News Asia, we're looking at how polarizing this one item of clothing is. In Iran, for instance, hundreds of thousands of women protested last year against its mandatory wearing in the country. Conversely, in India, Muslim students protested for the right to wear a hijab in their classrooms. The protests in the southern state of Karnataka last year began after a government ban. India's Supreme Court still needs to decide on the matter, but for many Muslim students in the country, it's a matter of personal choice.
Rida Mobin is getting her master's in communication at Jamia Millia Islamia University in Delhi. She started wearing the hijab about 7 years ago and is one of 3 women in her class who do so. She believes that women across the world, irrespective of their religion, should have the right to choose what they want or don't want to wear. Rida says people often stare at her, but that she has gotten used to it.
It wasn't something that came to me through family. It was something that I discovered and chose. So at the moment that I decided I was going to wear a hijab, I think that moment it became a part of my identity. It became a part of who I was.
Last year, the southern state of Karnataka saw major protests both for and against the hijab after 6 students were barred from attending classes for wearing one. Officials shut down schools and universities for days because they feared violence. Following the controversy, the Karnataka High Court upheld the ban on hijabs in classrooms, stating that the hijab is not essential to Islam. Later, when the matter reached the Supreme Court, it delivered a split verdict. Rida often talks about the tensions in Karnataka with her friend Naila, who also wears the hijab. Both say that the controversy had nothing to do with the hijab per se. Instead, it was about patriarchy and men wanting to control women's choices, as well as with rising Islamophobia in India. Naila says she does not think women wear the hijab because the men in their lives force them to. They do so because of their faith, and this is their right. But she and Rida are both against the forceful imposition of hijab.
You can obviously owe it a lot to the Western media, news media in general, which has always portrayed a hijabi woman as oppressed. A person who wears a hijab is often seen as somebody who doesn't have their own opinions, somebody who doesn't have their own agency, and who is governed by what the men in their life says.
Rida agrees. She has vowed to take legal recourse if someday she is told to remove her hijab.
I know a friend of mine who was refused a job offer. The condition for the job was she had to remove her hijab, and unfortunately she had to leave it. We need to create inclusive societies, inclusive workplaces where everyone, people from all cultures are accepted and all identities and identical markers are accepted.
Both Naila and Rida struggle with prejudice every day, whether it is from an individual stare or a national debate. But their struggle has only strengthened their beliefs and the feeling of empowerment they say the hijab has given them.
And joining me now from Delhi for more context is award-winning journalist and commentator Simi Pasha. Simi, the hijab debate in India, is it around the question of oppression versus empowerment, or is it something else?
Videsh, it's actually a very complicated issue as far as India is concerned. In Iran, on the other hand, you have an Islamist regime asking Muslim women to necessarily wear a hijab. In India, on the other hand, there are a group of women who want to wear a hijab. And the Hindu nationalist government has banned wearing of hijabs in schools in Karnataka. It actually started last February with a group of 6 girls in a pre-university college in Udupi in Karnataka. They were barred from entering their classrooms while wearing a hijab. The school administration said when entering the classroom, they have to remove their hijab. And the girls said that they're wearing it because they don't want to come without the hijab in front of men. And some of the teachers were male teachers. And the standoff continued and it grew. And then it actually became a matter of choice. So the girls were forced to choose between their right to receive an education, which is a fundamental right in India, versus their right to practice their religion, which is also a fundamental right, and the right to wear what you want to wear, which is, I think, a basic right that every individual in the world should enjoy. The state actually has no right to enter anybody's wardrobe and
But
to tell
then,
anybody that
Simi,
you can
sorry to
wear this or
interrupt
cannot
you.
wear this. Sounds
I'm really sorry I'm interrupting you, Simi. But then the High Court, the Karnataka High Court said in this matter that hijab isn't essential to Islam. Why do the students have a problem accepting that?
So, Brijesh, it's not about Brijesh. It's not whether the practice of wearing a hijab is essential to the practice of Islam or not. It's whether the girls, why are they being forced to choose between practicing a religious belief that they believe is essential and their right to basic education. In fact, the order of the Karnataka High Court was also challenged in the Supreme Court, which then delivered a split verdict that came in October last year. So basically, one of the dissenting judges, one judge said that the Karnataka High Court was right in continuing with the ban imposed by the state of Karnataka. The other judge, Justice Hulia, said that India is a mature secular democracy. As long as there is a religious practice which doesn't harm anyone's sentiments, there is no harm in continuing with it. Why force the students to choose between wearing a hijab and receiving an education? That's a direct violation of a fundamental right that the Constitution of India guarantees. So it may not be an essential practice of Islam, as one of the judges said. But there are religious experts who believe that it is a fundamental practice. But you may not. You can debate on that. My point is that you cannot force the girls to choose between wearing something that they think is essential to their practice and their beliefs and their right to receive an education.
Is politics making the girls have to decide between their education and their religious practice?
Absolutely. And it's such a shameful thing because what happened in Karnataka last year was that these young girls may have been like 14 or 15. They were harassed. They were barred from entering their classrooms because the school administration thought that it was not proper of them to wear the hijab. What happened in Udupi in Karnataka at that time was that these Hindu fundamentalist groups entered that political stage. They distributed saffron shawls to Hindu boys and girls. So there was a standoff inside the school campus. You're basically politicizing and communalizing classrooms in India. You had teenagers who were fighting literally a pitched battle on religious grounds, which was a very sad day as far as the education system in India is concerned and the Indian politics is concerned. To make politics so dirty that you're engaging teenagers into it and forcing them to make a choice. You had a teenage girl wearing a burqa being heckled by a group of boys, and she turned around and said Allahu Akbar, and that Allahu Akbar, I remember, had become such a big news issue that a cry which actually Allahu Akbar means Allah is the greatest. But it's also seen as a war cry in some cultures. It became problematic, and that Allahu Akbar was seen as an expression of fundamentalism, which is not the case. If she's being heckled, how is a lonely girl and there's also a threat of sexual violence, I feel, which is so much present when you have a single teenager, 15-year-old, being surrounded by a group of 20 boys wearing saffron shawls and heckling her. How else is she supposed to respond? It's a very difficult situation, and it's really sad that these girls have been put at the center of national politics.
You talked about choice, Simi. Isn't it also true that it isn't always a matter of personal choice? There are communities in India in which girls are forced to wear the hijab. Isn't that also true?
So, Besh, you are right. I mean, there's no black and white as far as this is concerned. But my only point is that, of course, there are women who choose to wear a hijab. I recently did a piece for an Indian magazine where I interviewed 5 women, including an architect, a journalist, another media person, and a housewife. And they said that they had chosen to wear the hijab. They were the first people in their family to start wearing a hijab. And there was a lot of opposition that they received from their colleagues, from society in general. One woman said that her neighbors didn't speak to her, didn't acknowledge her presence. In fact, one of the lawyers was, this girl was a lawyer. She said she was forced to stop wearing the hijab because she was scared that her 1-year-old, there were no play dates that she could arrange for her little kid. So she was forced to take off the hijab. But of course, there are families in which there are girls who are forced to wear hijab. I'm sure there are also women who believe that this is a cultural and traditional practice, which is why they should be wearing it. But the only point that needs to be focused on here is that the state has no business to enter this territory.
All right. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks so much, Simi, for joining us today.